So, in the previous episodes, Orhan defeated the legendary Black Dragon alone, the same creature that killed the greatest adventurer in the country the year before, and he walked out of that cave standing. His old party showed up expecting to clean up the mess they caused, and instead found out exactly what they threw away. Now, he's joined the Silver Rabbit clan as a lieutenant, got a new party, and is finally building something worth fighting for. Oh, and somewhere out there, a girl named Keon who thought Orhan was dead is heading straight toward him. Now, let's get into the next episode. A couple of days passed, and one morning Selma called a team meeting to go over a newly assigned quest. Everyone took their seats, but the feeling of being back in a party again still felt strange to Orhan. It had been so long since he had chosen to go solo that he had completely forgotten what this was like. Selma opened the meeting by revealing that the Adventure Management Division had assigned them the task of collecting noxious sheep pelts, and they would be heading to the 86th floor to carry it out, which would also serve as a chance to practice their teamwork with Orhan in the mix. Orhan quietly promised himself that he would make sure this party pushed past the 94th floor one day so they could stand proudly on equal footing with the hero's party. They entered the 86th floor a short while later. It was part of the lower dungeon levels, but the scenery was strikingly beautiful, lush, and calm. Selma reminded everyone not to get distracted, pointing out that earth dragons were common on this floor and were not to be underestimated. Their primary objective, however, was to get a feel for working with Orhan as a unit. She laid out the roles clearly. Will would hold the monster's attention for as long as possible. Rain would attack from the rear with her explosive magic. Otis would join in the assault while keeping her healing spells ready at a moment's notice. Selma herself would maintain everyone's buffs and handle all commanding decisions. And Orhan would serve as their ace, the frontline attacker responsible for dealing the majority of the damage. Otis remarked that Orhan was probably strong enough to handle every monster on the floor by himself. Will agreed, wondering aloud whether the rest of them would just end up getting in his way. Selma turned to Orhan and said that if he felt he would genuinely be more effective fighting alone, she had no objection. Orhan replied immediately that he was part of this team and would follow her orders. Selma recognized she had made a foolish suggestion and was about to say so when a massive fireball came screaming toward them out of nowhere. Orhan moved instantly, dodging the blast and simultaneously throwing up a defensive wall to cover the entire team. He scanned the area and determined it was the work of an earth dragon, but couldn't see one anywhere. It was hiding. Otis stepped forward and told him to leave the tracking to her. She possessed a special ability called magic tracking, which allowed her to pinpoint the location of hidden enemies by reading the magical residue left behind in an area that had been attacked. She swept the surroundings and quickly identified the dragon concealing itself behind a cluster of bushes. She fired a flare-type ability to draw it out into the open, and Will immediately got into position. The monster charged toward them and Will went straight at it. Selma watched with quiet satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of teamwork she wanted Orhan to see. Will closed the gap while Rain began charging her attack behind him. The dragon fired a fireball. Will sliced straight through it without breaking stride. The dragon followed up with several more blasts, but Will either cut them apart or evaded them entirely. Once he had baited the dragon into exactly the right position, he fell back, and Rain triggered one of her trap cards, detonating a full explosion spell directly on top of the creature. The dragon was finished in moments. Orhan was impressed. He had expected competence, but not this level of polish. He took a closer look at Will and his lance and realized that Will hadn't just been deflecting the fireballs, he had been nullifying the magic inside them entirely, canceling the spells at their core. And Rain had unleashed a high-grade explosive skill with a speed and fluidity that would have taken most casters twice as long to pull off. Otis's tracking ability effectively removed the possibility of anyone getting blindsided, and Selma was the one holding it all together, binding every moving piece into a single, well-oiled unit. He told Selma directly that he was genuinely impressed by every member of the team. She flushed slightly, but before she could respond, a loud roar erupted behind them. Two more earth dragons had woken up and were ready to fight. Selma said this was exactly the kind of opportunity they needed to keep practicing. Orhan and Will launched themselves at the dragons simultaneously. Midway through his charge, Orhan stopped and turned around. Something felt wrong. He fired a rock arrow into what appeared to be empty space. His instinct was right. A heavily armored turtle monster had been slowly closing in on Selma and the others from behind, preparing to ambush them. His intervention stopped it cold. The problem was that they were now caught between two earth dragons in front and the armored turtle behind. Selma took charge without hesitation. She assessed that the turtle had an exceptionally strong shell but moved extremely slowly, making it an ideal target for spellcasters. She directed Rain and Otis to handle the turtle while she ordered Orhan and Will to focus entirely on the earth dragons without concern for anything behind them. Orhan found himself genuinely enjoying this. Selma's calls were sharp and decisive, exactly the kind of leadership that made someone worth following. The dragons charged, hurling fireballs as they came. Will positioned himself between them and Orhan, acting as an immovable wall, cutting through every fireball and keeping the dragon's attention fully on himself. Orhan circled wide to flank them from the side for a better angle. He layered his magical buffs onto himself, sharpening his blade and amplifying his strength, then waited for the signal. Selma told him to hold for 5 seconds, let the dragons overextend, and then strike simultaneously with Will. He held. Will baited an attack and jumped back at the right moment, and Orhan unleashed his air cutter, slicing through both dragons cleanly and putting them down in a single sweep. At the same time, Rain and Otis worked through the turtle in sequence, a lightning strike first, followed by a fire blast, then an ice field that shattered what was left of it. Another clean win. As they moved through the fields afterward, Orhan mentioned that it had been a long time since a fight had felt this effortless. He usually had to shoulder so much more by himself. Selma paused and asked him seriously, in his honest assessment, did he think they were ready to take on Floor 92? Orhan told her they were more than ready for it, and added that he believed they had the ability to defeat the Black Dragon even without him, if they kept their composure. Selma wasn't as quick to agree. She had faced that dragon recently during the teaching expedition, and she knew exactly how terrifying it was. She didn't want to lose anyone to it. By the time the sun began to set, the mission was done. They had collected more than enough noxious sheep pelts to mark it a complete success. Orhan asked Selma if she could point him toward the Adventure Management Office, since they had called for him. She told him not to worry about finding it alone. She needed to report the mission's completion anyway, and would go with him. He thanked her, and that evening the entire team gathered at a pub to eat, celebrate, and talk through the day. A couple of drinks later, things took a turn. Selma got drunk and began directing her attention very openly at Orhan. He could feel himself starting to lose his own resolve and knew he needed to do something before the situation got out of hand. Before he could act, Rain appeared beside him, latched onto his arm, and pressed herself close. Will watched the whole scene from across the table with great enthusiasm, loudly congratulating Orhan on his apparent success. Orhan decided he had seen enough. The moment a window opened, he used his sleep magic on both women and sent them into a deep, peaceful slumber. Later that evening, Sophia was relaxing in her room waiting for Selma to come home when she heard a knock at the door. She assumed it was her sister. It was Orhan's voice instead. Slightly flustered, she wasn't dressed for company. She hesitated, but he told her Selma was with him and asked her to let them in. She opened the door and immediately understood the situation. Selma was draped across Orhan's back like a sack, which looked considerably worse than any walk of shame Sophia had ever witnessed. She told her sister to get off Orhan's back immediately. She also noticed that Orhan had come in smiling, which only made her feel more conflicted. She had feelings for him. That much she couldn't deny, and watching this play out in front of her stung in a way she didn't quite know how to manage. After things settled, Sophia quietly told Selma that she was probably making Orhan uncomfortable. Selma apologized and disappeared into the bathroom for a shower. Standing under the hot water, she thought about the way Sophia looked at Orhan and recognized it immediately for what it was. Orhan was clearly Sophia's first love, and she had no intention of getting in the way of that. But then she started replaying her own behavior from the evening, and the memory of calling him handsome floated to the surface. She began to spiral. She asked herself honestly whether she simply admired Orhan as a person and respected him as an adventurer, or whether something deeper was growing there, something that could quietly complicate everything between her and her sister as time went on. The next morning, Selma accompanied Orhan to the management reception where they found Stella waiting for them. Her desk was an absolute disaster, but she didn't seem to notice or care and carried on with her day regardless. She introduced Orhan to Carla, the woman responsible for overseeing the newer adventures in the clan. Carla greeted him warmly and told him he would be taking over the training of group number 10 going forward. She asked whether he had gone through their files. Orhan replied that he already knew them personally, but had reviewed the files carefully before committing to the decision. Carla looked visibly relieved and thanked him for taking them on. Stella added that at this point, Orhan was probably the only person who could handle that particular group. Orhan smiled and asked what the training policy was and how hard he was allowed to push them. Stella told him there was no formal policy. He was free to train them however he saw fit, drawing from his own experience. The goal was simply to prepare them well enough that they could operate independently in the outside world without getting into serious trouble. Orhan looked a little uncertain about the open-ended direction, and Selma understood him well enough to suggest that having a concrete target to work toward would probably help him more than a vague objective. Stella thought about it and replied that Orhan should aim to get the group capable of independently handling the middle-level dungeon floors within 6 months. Orhan remarked that those were high expectations for rookies. Stella replied that this particular group were both the biggest troublemakers and the most talented of the entire intake, so high expectations were appropriate. She also noted that they had already shown considerable growth during the teaching expedition. Orhan agreed to give it his best, and the two of them left the room to get back to their respective work. In the corridor, Selma stopped suddenly and mentioned that if Orhan had read all the files, he now knew everything about both Sophia and herself. Orhan looked slightly uncomfortable and gave a small nod. A quiet sadness crossed Selma's face as she explained. Sophia was the daughter of a maid who had also been their father's mistress. Things might have been manageable, but Sophia's mother passed away just a couple of years after giving birth to her. The family took Sophia in, but as the illegitimate child of a low-born woman, she never truly belonged. She was treated as an outsider from the very beginning. It became even harder when Selma left home to become an adventurer. When she returned for the first time, she found Sophia with empty eyes and a hollow expression, the kind that comes from two adults making careless decisions while a child quietly absorbs all the damage. Selma couldn't bear it. The next time she left, she took Sophia with her. From that day forward, she treated her as a true sister in every sense of the word. She looked at Orhan and told him plainly that Sophia was the only thing in this world she truly loved, and she wanted to see her grow into a confident and capable adventurer no matter what it took. Orhan promised to take care of her. He bid Selma goodbye and walked into the training room, where all 3 members of Group 10 were already waiting for him with barely contained excitement. They immediately crowded around him with enthusiastic greetings. He settled them down and sat in front of them, telling them that he had been given the responsibility of training them from this point on. All 3 were visibly delighted. Carol declared that he was incredibly strong and could do anything. Orhan replied that he still had a great deal to learn himself. Sophia immediately cut him off, pointing out that he had defeated the Black Dragon completely on his own. So Carol was right. Orhan smiled quietly. He thought about how close that fight had actually come to going the other way, but pushed the thought aside and simply thanked them, telling them that one day they would have to face challenges just as serious. So they needed to train with everything they had before that day arrived. He gave them a short but sincere pep talk, telling each of them that they had real potential waiting to be developed and that he genuinely believed they could one day clear dungeons entirely on their own terms. The group lit up with energy and thanked him for taking them on. Orhan smiled and moved into the first lesson. He told them there were 2 things he wanted them to keep in mind at all times. The first was to stay mentally flexible. Plans would fall apart, and when they did, they needed to be able to adapt on the spot and find a way through regardless. The second was to think for themselves, because not everything he told them would be right. He admitted openly that he had made plenty of mistakes in his own time, and that wearing the title of teacher didn't make him automatically correct. With that foundation laid, he asked each of them to share why they had chosen to become adventurers. He started with Sophia. She looked a little embarrassed at first, but then said honestly that she wanted to be like Selma, to become a capable adventurer who could make her own decisions without fear of anyone. Orhan promised to help her get there. He then turned to Logan. Logan answered without any hesitation. He was doing it for money. The girls reacted with visible surprise. Orhan told him to continue. Logan explained that he came from a very poor village where simply putting food on the table was a daily struggle, and people fought constantly just to survive. Despite all of that, the villagers had pooled what little they had and sent him to the city so that his talent wouldn't go to waste in a place that couldn't support it. That was why he was determined to become a successful successful adventurer, to pay every single one of them back for what they had sacrificed. He admitted that he had arrived in the city thinking he was already a strong fighter, but the moment he came face to face with the Black Dragon and witnessed what a truly elite adventurer looked like, he understood how far he still had to go. Orhan told him he would teach him everything he could, but Logan would have to match that effort on his end if he wanted to repay his village the way it deserved. He then turned to Carol and asked about her motivation. She replied simply that she didn't really have one. She fought because she could kill monsters, and that made people happy, and she liked seeing smiles on people's faces. Orhan looked at her carefully. He could see that the grief and anger buried inside her ran very deep, even as she tried to cover everything with lightness. She added that monsters took smiles away from people, so she got rid of the monsters. Orhan decided not to press her further and moved on, asking all three of them to hold on to their individual reasons as they trained, to let those reasons fuel them when things got hard. Sophia then asked Orhan why he had become an adventurer. He thought about everything he had gone through as a child and replied that he wanted to grow strong enough that the things and people he cared about could never be taken from him again, no matter what. He then told them plainly that he wasn't going to treat them like children, and he expected them to give him everything they had in return. The very next morning, training began in the lower-level dungeons. They came across a pack of wolf monsters, and Carol charged straight in without hesitation, cutting down two of them immediately with her daggers before moving on to the next. Orhan watched, thinking about the core problem with her approach. She was a defender, and her actual job was to draw enemy attention and protect her teammates, not to chase kills like an attacker. Sure enough, she left herself completely exposed from behind. Orhan had already anticipated it. He conjured a shield wall to intercept the wolf closing in on her blind side, then stepped in and took its head off. He asked Carol directly why she had left her back completely unguarded. She smiled and said it didn't really matter to her. Then, to his shock, she brought her dagger up and sliced open her own wrist. Orhan moved immediately to stop the bleeding, and then stared as the wound sealed itself shut on its own. He had never seen anything like it. Carol told him calmly that she couldn't really be killed. Her body healed itself automatically. She was completely accustomed to pain, and that was why she had never bothered focusing on defense. Orhan thought about what he knew of her history. Carol had been taken from her home by a criminal organization operating under the guise of a church. Because of her regenerative abilities, she had been subjected to all manner of experiments. The organization's singular obsession was the resurrection of an ancient overlord, and it had grown into the largest crime syndicate on the continent. Carol had been rescued 2 years prior by the first unit of the Silver Rabbit clan, the unit that had included Albert. She had been deeply unstable when they found her, but gradually she had steadied herself and chosen to become an adventurer on her own terms. Albert's death had hit her harder than she ever let on. Orhan tried to reach her. He told her gently that every time she got hurt, both he and the rest of the team felt it, and their smiles disappeared right along with it. That got through to her in a way nothing else had. She dropped her daggers and broke down crying, promising she would never do anything like that again. Orhan reached out to put a hand on her shoulder and she flinched away hard, begging him not to hit her. The weight of that reaction settled heavily on him. He understood in that moment just how deep her trauma ran. He stepped forward and pulled her into a firm hug. She went still, confused by it. He told her quietly that as long as he was around, no one was going to hurt her. She had nothing to worry about anymore. The next morning, real training began. Orhan worked with Carol on dodging rather than absorbing hits, teaching her to use her speed and instincts defensively rather than purely offensively. Logan was given a spear to work with, pushing him toward becoming a more adaptable and well-rounded member of the group. Sophia was tasked with counting backwards from 500 while simultaneously hitting targets with 3 different spells at once. The same training circuit repeated over the following days, and eventually Will took over Logan's spear training. He was better with the weapon than Orhan anyway, which freed Orhan to focus his full attention on Carol and Sophia, both of whom were improving noticeably with each session. When Orhan finally felt satisfied with where they had reached, he called them together and told them they had all cleared the basic training phase and were ready to move on to the next level, which would be harder, but which he had full confidence they could handle. The group celebrated loudly. Then, Rain stepped into the training room and told Orhan it was time to head out. The blacksmith had finished his sword. Orhan headed excitedly to the blacksmith, who handed over the finished sword. The moment it settled into his grip, it felt like it had been made specifically for him. The angle, the weight, the feel, all of it perfect. He made a quiet promise to himself that with this blade, He would make sure none of his comrades ever got hurt again. He had no idea what was waiting just around the corner. The sword was lighter than anything he had used before, yet looked dangerously sharp. Rain remarked that in the entire kingdom, no one else possessed a weapon like it. Orhan silently reaffirmed his promise. No matter the situation, he would protect the people close to him. The very next morning, Orhan and his party descended into the dungeon and pushed all the way down to the 91st floor. There they encountered the undead king, but the monster was no match for Orhan and his new sword. He cut it clean in half with a single strike, then stared at the blade for a moment, genuinely impressed by what it could do. The rest of the party congratulated him on taking the monster down single-handedly, which meant the 91st floor was cleared and the path to the next one was open. Selma asked how the new sword felt. Orhan said it felt like a natural extension of his hand. Will noted that the Silver Rabbit clan had some of the finest blacksmiths in the business, and Orhan had to agree. He had never seen craftsmanship like it. Selma added that the materials mattered just as much as the skill, and since Orhan had used black dragon scales as the core material, the resulting weapon was naturally going to be among the rarest and finest in the entire realm. After the brief celebration, Selma told them all it was time to head back to the guild. Clearing the 91st floor meant their next destination was the 92nd, the floor where Albert had lost his life to the Black Dragon. She promised that this time they would finish it. By the time they emerged from the dungeon, the sun was nearly setting. That evening, as Otis was talking about wanting food and a long bath, Selma pulled Orhan aside and asked for a private word. He tensed slightly, wondering if something was wrong. She quickly clarified that it was nothing serious. She just wanted to talk through their plan for the next floor. Orhan apologized and told her he couldn't that evening, as he had already promised Sophia's group that he would take them on a dungeon run in the morning and intended to keep that commitment. Selma seemed a little surprised, asking whether he should be resting given that they were also heading to the 92nd floor in a couple of days. Orhan told her not to worry. He was going purely as an instructor, and all the fighting would be handled by the rookies. He mentioned that they had been developing well, and he expected them to be able to clear the 29th floor entirely on their own. He would simply be there as a precaution. Selma thought quietly about how fast time had moved. Not long ago, Sophia had been a fresh recruit who could barely control her own magic, and now she was on the verge of reaching floor 30, after which she would be considered a fully qualified adventurer and sent on independent missions without supervision. That night, Orhan visited the old man at his shop and sat down for some tea. The old man looked troubled. He told Orhan he had been hearing some unsettling rumors lately. Word going around that the criminal organization Armanthrop had resurfaced and was back to its old reputation as an adventure killer. The reports were coming from the southern dungeons, but the news was not good. Orhan understood the weight of it immediately. There were two major criminal organizations in this world, Armanthrop and the Church. Armanthrop operated under the belief that dungeons were something ancient and sacred that humans had no right to disturb, and they enforced that belief with extreme violence. Meanwhile, the rest of his unit was quietly preparing themselves in their own way for what lay ahead on the 92nd floor. Rain sat alone in her room, moonlight spilling through the window, holding the robe Albert had worn the day he died fighting the Black Dragon. She spoke to him quietly, telling him to watch from wherever he was, because they were coming to finish what he had started. Will had gone to the blacksmith to collect a custom spear he had ordered and thanked the craftsman for another exceptional job, saying that with this weapon he intended to claim the revenge they had all been waiting for. The blacksmith smiled and told Will he had grown enormously since the previous year. Will's expression turned heavy. He said Albert had died because he hadn't been strong enough, that it should have been him who fell that day, not the man who was the heart of their clan, who had given his life protecting the rest of them. Otis sat by a fountain under the silver glow of the moon, turning the past year over in her mind. Everything they had endured, how much stronger they had all become. but she still found herself asking whether that would truly be enough against something that had already taken so many lives. She made herself a quiet promise. This time, she wasn't going to let anyone die. They were all coming home. Selma stood at her window in her room, completely lost in her own thoughts. Sophia found her there and asked if she was worried about facing the dragon again. She admitted that she didn't want Selma going anywhere near it. Even when Orhan had defeated it, he had come out of the fight in terrible shape, and no one could know for certain how things would unfold in a second encounter. Selma replied that it had been over a year since Albert's death, and she believed the party had grown strong enough to avenge him. Sophia stepped forward and hugged her, telling her she believed in her and her team and that everything was going to be all right. The next morning, Orhan took the young party into the dungeon, and they cleared the 29th floor without any significant trouble. He smiled at them and told them they had all grown considerably as adventurers, and that clearing the 30th floor would mark their official graduation from new recruits to fully qualified adventurers. Everyone was happy until Sophia realized that once they became full adventurers, they would be assigned to a unit, which meant Orhan would no longer be their instructor. The thought quietly dampened her mood, but she pushed it aside and headed back to the guild with the others. They submitted their report to the receptionist, who informed them that they would need to pass one final test. Clearing floor 30 entirely on their own, with a senior adventurer from Unit 2 observing to confirm they were ready to operate independently. The test could be arranged in 2 days. The group exchanged glances and realized that in 2 days, Orhan's party was scheduled to descend to the 92nd floor. They had wanted Orhan present for their test and asked the receptionist if the date could be shifted. She replied that given how packed everyone's schedules were, rescheduling the test could push it back considerably. Orhan stepped in and offered to speak to Selma about postponing the trip to the 92nd floor by a few days. Sophia immediately stopped him. She said the others had been waiting for that day for over a year, and it would be cruel to delay it any further on their account. The 3 of them told Orhan to let them handle the dungeon themselves, with Carol adding that she would keep her reckless tendencies in check this time. Orhan had no real argument left. He agreed. Before he stepped back entirely, he asked to review their floor plan to make sure their thinking was sound. He went through it carefully and told them the approach looked solid overall, but reminded them to stay flexible. Things rarely went exactly as planned. He then handed each of them a small pendant as a good luck charm and wished them well. The days leading up to both tests passed quickly, with each party preparing in their own way. When the day finally, at the same time, Orhan and his party reached the 92nd floor and entered the dragon's chamber. The creature woke immediately. Selma moved fast, buffing all her teammates in rapid succession. Orhan used his original spell to multiply his own stats 4 times over. The fight opened hard. Will drove his lance through the dragon's tail and Orhan came straight after, severing it completely. The rest of the unit continued pouring in support magic to keep the pressure on. Back on floor 30, Sophia's group reached the boss room and found 4 other adventurers already waiting at the entrance. They were from the church. One of them used a mind-reading ability on Logan, and the moment he realized these rookies were connected to the Dragon Slayer, something shifted in his expression. Their supervisor stepped in between with a drawn sword, sensing the danger immediately. In one effortless motion, the man's head was removed. The rookies froze in horror. The largest of the church members raised a hand and used earth magic to seal off every exit. Carol didn't hesitate. She rushed at him to buy the others time and was launched straight into a wall for it. Back on the 92nd floor, Orhan felt the pendants he had given the rookies activate, the emergency signal he had built into them. He told Selma immediately that the rookies were in serious danger, but they couldn't leave the floor, not with the dragon still in the fight. And the dragon, sensing the shift in focus, had already begun to recover, regrowing its severed tail and one of the wings Orhan had destroyed, undoing everything they had worked for. Orhan stood with his back against the wall, caught between 2. Stay tuned for the further parts. Subscribe if you really loves this.